don't think I should be a TEDx speaker. First of all, I'm an English professor whose life is devoted to studying old texts, looking for surprisingly new patterns, which are of no interest to anybody except a few other English professors. So I have nothing very innovative to offer. Secondly, I have a visceral antipathy to inspirational speaking. I must confess, at sermons, even the most noble, inspiring sermons for most people, evoke in me a kind of antipathy. I think of doing the opposite of what the preacher is suggesting. So I have very little inspirational to offer. In fact, slogans usually evoke a kind of negative response. Live mas, whatever that means, or even yes we can, almost made me a Republican. I have this problem with slogans, and when it comes to buying automobiles, I usually buy the automobile that's least advertised. I won't tell you, I recently bought one, and I bought an automobile that had the least promotional backup of any of the cars on the market. So here I am. I was invited by these young TEDx planners to give this talk, and I tried to get out of it. Well, first of all, I wrote a lecture. I wrote Emerson and Me. I was inspired, despite my antipathy to inspiration, by reading Emerson's journals over the past year. They really inspired me. And so I thought, well, I'll write a paper on Emerson and Me. And I would read it, and there would be quotations, and it would be sort of an English professor-like lecture. They said, no, you can't do that. You have to speak without a text. So they said, this idea, one idea you developed in this paper is the idea of how Emerson was constantly surprised by himself, by his reactions to people, to books, to nature. And you were surprised by your being surprised by reading him. There were two levels of surprise. Emerson's surprises recorded in his journal, the 2-volume edition, Library of America edition. It's a wonderful text to read. And your own, so his surprises and your surprise that you were surprised by his surprises. So why don't you deal with surprise? All right, so this is what I'm going to talk about, surprise, living for surprise. Of course, at my age, surprises are often unwelcome. You go to your urologist, and he has unwelcome surprises. And so not all surprises are beneficent. Surprises, what do? They subvert and disturb our conventional psychological and perceptual expectations. And so some surprises are negative, but also surprise, especially as you get older, this is what makes life, falling in love is a surprise. I'm not going to speak about that. But these are the moments in one's life when one is taken out of normal perceptual and psychological states of mind. And even negative surprises can be, sometimes a source of insight and reflection. They can force you to reflect and discover what you did not already know. Travel, and we take out insurance policies to protect us from surprises. And when we travel, we often buy tours, and we're sort of managed by tour guides. And I've done this before, and I took a tour this recently of the Eastern Mediterranean. I do not speak Greek or Turkish, so I needed to be guided, and I therefore did not have a lot of surprises in this. I saw the customary ruins. Occasionally I would play hooky and go off by myself, and those were the most interesting moments. I can speak some foreign languages. My Italian is pretty good. So in Italy, I'm able to sort of go off and speak to people outside the normal tourist venues. And so I'll talk about a few moments of surprise that I've had in traveling, then move to more sort of, I don't want to say mystical moments of surprise. There's a city in northern Italy, well, central Italy, Cortona. It's in Tuscany. It's a city made famous by a book called Under the Tuscan Sun. But I had two very interesting moments of surprise in Cortona. I would sit sometimes in the central piazza on the stairs of the cathedral and talk to people, especially old people, because they would reveal worlds that no longer existed. And this was in the early 90s. I was sitting there. There's this older man next to me, and we started talking, and I asked him about his life, and he told me a story that opened a whole new world to me that I was unaware of. He had been an Italian soldier in Russia. Mussolini had sent soldiers to fight on the side of the Germans in Russia in that campaign, the Russian campaign. And he had deserted after Italy surrendered. These poor Italian soldiers were left there. And he was able somehow to find his way back to Tuscany, to his mother's farm outside of Cortona. Billeted there were 3 German soldiers. And when they saw him, they said, well, you're under arrest. You're a deserter. You're a deserter. His mother winked at him. His mother winked at him. And what she proceeded to do was prepare food that was heavily salted. Heavily salted. So the German soldiers, one of them was an officer, drank wine, a great deal of wine because of the saltiness of the food. They thereby fell asleep. They fell asleep. And he was able to escape with his life. And it was a kind of interesting story. It evoked another sort of world that I was unaware of. A second moment in Cortona was, I was wandering the city. It was sort of late afternoon. And I came across this convent church. And there was a sign in Italian that said, Vespers are sung here and open to the public on Thursdays at 6 o'clock. And it was Thursday, and it was 6:10. So I knocked on the door, and a sister removed a grate, and she looked at me, and I said, I want to hear the Vespers, and she let me in. And I was in this room separated by a screen from the chapel itself, where there were 9 nuns of different ages, and they were singing the Vespers. It was very haunting, this choir. And before them, in a glass enclosed case, a very elongated glass enclosed case, were the remains, was the corpse, preserved corpse of St. Margaret of Cortona, who was the patroness. Well, she was buried in this convent. She was the founding abbess of the convent. So the combination of the corpse, the remains preserved, she's a saint, and the choir singing, women in their 80s, young women in their 20s. It was very, very mystical. It was a gift, And so that sometimes wandering off from the beaten paths as a tourist can allow you to have these sort of interesting discoveries. I'm going to talk about 2 other kinds of surprises that occur sort of after the fact, posterior surprises. When I was a young man once, and I was doing a doctorate. I did my doctorate at Notre Dame. And on Sundays, at that time in Indiana, you could not drink alcohol. Graduate students in English and philosophy drank a lot. They were poor, they drank cheap beer. But in South Bend at that time, on Sunday, you couldn't drink. So we would go north, we would go to Niles, Michigan. I don't know if any of you know the geography of this part of the United States, to roadhouses that would be open on Sunday. And I remember going up there with friends, and a woman, there was a fortune teller, a female fortune teller. You wouldn't think in Indiana, Michigan, in Indiana, that area, there would be fortune tellers. So it was sort of unusual. And she wanted to read my fortune. So I gave her my palm, and she looked at it, and then she said, you are a penchant for short women. Short women are your vulnerability. And you will meet soon a short woman who will change your life. So I didn't pay much attention to that. And shortly, about 4 or 5 months later, must have been maybe 5 months later, I met a short woman from Argentina, and we ended up getting married. And we're still married after 47 years. I could say that that probably changed my life, but I didn't, pay any attention to her prediction until several months after my marriage, when it was kind of a posterior surprise. She was right. She predicted this would happen. So that was a very strange kind of surprise, welcome surprise, but it occurred after the fact. A second surprise of that kind occurred to me when I was in Spain, in Madrid, and with my wife, and we had lunch, and we were walking through the center of Madrid, and suddenly she's lying on the ground screaming, and I, of course, as a gallant husband, grabbed the young man who had taken her purse and had pushed her to the ground. And I had pushed him against a wall, and he was very slight, but suddenly I weakened, and he was able to extricate himself from me and run away. And while I was holding him, apparently a friend, he had a friend, an accomplice, came from behind and stabbed me, aiming, I think, at my kidneys, but instead puncturing me in my left elbow. And I was bleeding profusely, but I didn't know. The adrenaline was so intensely secreted that I didn't even know I had been stabbed. And so we ended up, we took care of my wife, and then I had to get, suddenly people said, you're bleeding, you need to go to a hospital, et cetera, et cetera. So I had 14 stitches done to me in the great hospital, the Gregorio Marañón Hospital in Madrid. Now, the surprise occurs somewhat later. A few days after this event, I said, let me go revisit the street where this occurred. It's just sort of interesting. I would like to see where this had taken place. So I went back. The hotel we were staying in was not far from this street, and I was able to remember where the event had occurred. And I noticed the name of the street. The street was named Amor de Dios, love of God. Now, I'm somewhat of a Catholic at a distance, but boy, that really was eerie. Was God, love of God, was God trying to send a message to me? You repent, your time is up. Here on the street of the love of God, I was stabbed. And that discovery 2 days after the event really was a surprise that had a kind of profound psychological impact on me. So those are two kind of posterior surprises. Now, in thinking about this talk, I was trying to find some other examples of surprise. And I thought of my brother. I have a brother. I should say something promotional, right? TED Talks promote. His name is Bill Fontana. He's younger than I, and he's a sound artist. And his whole life is devoted to developing technological interventions which enable you to hear sounds that you do not ordinarily hear with your naked ear. He'll take a bridge. He'll take bridges, for example. He loves bridges, and he'll wire them in such a way that you hear the sound of the bridge as the wind and the atmosphere affects it, or as people walk over it. He's done the Millennial Bridge in London. He's done the Brooklyn Bridge in New York. He's recently done the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco. He does cranes. He's currently doing the Thurston crane in Glasgow. He's done the bells at the Big Ben bells in London, developing the notion that to hear these bells in different parts of London is to hear a different sound, because at the point of reception, the sound of the bells is changed by the point at which it's being received. And then he mounted these different receptive point sounds together. So he's very inventive. His website, he doesn't know that I'm talking about him. He's a younger brother, but I feel obliged to sort of promote him here. His website is Resoundings, Bill Fontana, resoundings.com, Resoundings. Visit it. It's a source of surprise. The devices, the sounds that he imagines and seeks out are always a source of surprise for me and apparently for many of the institutions that engage him. So I suppose, even though I'm not suited, I have nothing really to promote, and I'm not a person at my age who is given to inspiration, I shall end this talk by encouraging you to break out of your customary habits of response. I think this is what the study of literature sort of teaches an attentive reader to do. Those great texts from the past and even from the near present, the near past, distant past and near past, can break down the sort of customary ways we respond, ways of response that we have learned from our culture, from our upbringing. We need to sort of disassemble those responsive, the muscles of response, in order to respond more flexibly to new stimuli. And this is what makes, and we do this through travel, through reading, through interacting with others, through falling in love, whatever it is. So I will end with a kind of banal sort of request. Live open to surprise. Live open to stimuli that take you out of your customary modes of response. Thank you.